The Fisher Queen's Dynasty. Written by Kavitakane. Bisham. His life had been one of regrets, and so would his death. Bisham lay still on his bed of arrows. It was not the arrows that hurt him but the memories piercing his defeated mind. They brought along a tide of remorse, regrets, promises and punishments, nothing of a joyous life, and courage born of faith. He knew he did not have much time to live. Death was upon him. That is, if he chose to die. But he had died a long time ago. He did not know when. Was it when he had been 20, and his life's purpose was snatched away from him, his throne, his identity, his father, his future? Or when Amba, the princess of Kasi, had cursed him to a living death? Was it when Draupadi was dragged by her hair into the very court where once he had defended his stepmother Satyavati's honor, but not the honor of Panchal's princess, the wife of his great-grandsons? Or had he died when her words taunted him, reminding him of his worthlessness? Or when the boys died one by one, his half-brothers, Chitrangad and Vichitravirya, his nephew, Pandu, and so many others? He felt the heat of the tears which refused to fall. What if, by a miracle, the present turned out to be just a terrorizing nightmare, and he was to wake up young again? Would he avoid making the terrible mistakes that ruined so many lives? Would he marry Vatsala, or agree to marry Amba to save her life and pride? Would he have his own children, and not spend his life looking after his half-brothers? Would he defy Satyavati, and not take his oath? Or not meet her at all? Satyavati, my father's wife, the Queen Mother, he sighed. He had a terrible longing to die, and a burning desire to live. Not for the sake of living, but to be given a chance to undo what he had done, rather, what he and Satyavati had irrevocably done. But she was long gone, leaving him to his wasted life, and, to face the consequences. He had longed for his life to be just, righteous and majestic, as the heavens above. Let me die. He saw the setting sun. Another day gone, another day of the war over, another day of battle won. Like the sinking sun, which does not rise twice during a day, life cannot be brought back. A person can only clutch at what is left of their life, and save it. But, he had been given his chance to live over and over again, and like Yudhishthir, he had gambled it away, making unforgivable mistakes. No, they were not mistakes, they were misdeeds which cannot be pardoned. He shut his eyes tiredly, waiting for it all to end. Who was he? He was Prabhas, a Vasudeva, born as Devavrat to goddess Ganga, to fulfill Rishi Vasishtha's curse. One can never run away from one's own destiny. It will meet them on the path they undertake to avoid it. He saw how his life had spanned across several generations, and how the sum total of his actions had worked its marvels and miracles. Each of his loved ones had visited him as he lay on the bed of arrows, his Arjun, the rest of the Pandavas, Duryodhan, Karna, Draupadi and Uruvi. To each he had begged for forgiveness, and beseeched them to never repeat his mistakes. To Yudhishthir, his eldest grandson and heir to Hastinapur, he had attempted to teach self-mastery because he wanted him to tell the world what happens when leaders fail in their knowledge and accomplishment, fail to defend and protect, fail to love, and are afraid to lose. He saw on the wide expanse towards the horizon the sun glittering on the water so dazzlingly that it hurt his eyes to look at it. It was like his truth. He yearned to be that lovely river, Ma, always with him but never near. He longed to die, only to die, and nothing more. He shut his eyes in self-repugnance as he thought about how he had failed all the women in his life. His mother, Ganga, Vatsala, his bride-to-be, Amba, Ambika and Ambalika, the three princesses he had abducted, but most of all, Amba, whom he lost in the fire of love and hate. Kunti, Gandhari and Madri, his granddaughters-in-law, whom he had used as pawns for political power, Uruvi, Karna's wife, to whom he had promised he would save her husband, and lastly, Draupadi, whom he could not defend at her worst hour in that very hall where he had killed a man who had dared to slander the good name of a Kuru queen, Satyavati. He had destroyed them all, for her, for that one woman. Satyavati. The birth, The tall, fair man refused to look down at the baby swaddled in the royal blanket. He turned his back and gave the fisherman a hard look. The mother gave birth to twins, sire, said the fisherman, Dasharaj. Yes, I know, replied King Uparacharvasu, shortly. I shall keep the boy. With me. You can have the girl. Dasharaj looked at the king, aghast. He was abandoning the girl. The king's face softened slightly, seeing the expression on Dasharaj's face. I know you have been pining for a child for a long time, Dasharaj. Keep the girl, she is your niece, after all, he coaxed, but there was a firmness in his voice. It was not a request, it was a royal command. Dasharaj could barely conceal his joy, he could keep one of the babies. He glanced at the infant girl again. Yes, after all, she was his niece, his dead sister Adrika's daughter. Like Adrika, the baby girl was unusually dark, her smooth ebony skin and her huge black eyes, always alert and watchful. She seemed to be staring at them now as if understanding each word. Did she know her father, the king of Chedi, was abandoning her, wondered Dasharaj. Dasharaj felt his heart contract. What the king had said was true. He had been yearning for a child for years, and ever since his wife had died last year he felt bereft like never before. Now Adrika was dead, too. He looked at the girl again. Both of them had nobody in the world. Yes, sir, I shall take her with me, he said quickly, before the king could change his mind. He swiftly picked up the bundle and cradled her in his arms. Overcome by a strong, indecipherable emotion, he felt his heart surge with indescribable joy. I shall never abandon you, he promised as he saw the dark eyes look up solemnly at him. I shall give you the love and life you deserve. I could not do much for your mother, but you are born the daughter of a king, shamelessly unacknowledged and deserted, but you shall be my princess. I shall never break your trust. I shall make you the royal princess that you are. And one day, the queen that you deserve to be. No, not again, please, he screamed as he saw his young wife about to fling the baby into the deep water of River Ganga. King Shantanu of Hastinapur rushed to save his newborn son from his wife's hands. No, you can't kill another one, he shouted, snatching the child from her palms. You murdered 7 of them before. Who are you? A monster or a murderess? I am Ganga, the river nymph, said the fair lady. Your wife, your queen, but no longer. He barely heard her, tears of relief flowing uninhibitedly down his stricken face. He had saved his son, his 8th son from certain death. His handsome face was contorted with cold fury. I never thought I could hate you as much as I do now. He spat. Which mother kills her babies? One who is destined to help them attain salvation, she said cryptically. Her unusually cold composure now broke through Shantanu's grief. Don't talk in riddles, Ganga, he snapped. Since Elle fell in love with you, you have always been secretive, an enigma, refusing to tell me anything about yourself. I loved you, and you laid down conditions. But I was desperate enough to marry you in spite of your terms. Don't ever question my actions or I shall leave you, you warned. All these years, I watched silently as you drowned each of my 7 newborn sons. If you want to leave me, Ganga, do so. Don't threaten me anymore. I can't stand the sight of you, you heartless woman. I shall not allow you to kill my 8th son. He cradled the infant close to his thudding heart. No, you cannot keep him. I have to go and so will he, she said quietly. Hot anger flooded his face. Don't you dare. Shantanu was a gentle person and Ganga had never seen her husband so livid before. Nor so devastated. He clutched at the baby as if he was clinging to his last hope of happiness. The baby was his son, the heir to Hastinapur. We are cursed, Shantanu, she stated sadly. And so is this child. Today, after asking me this question, you have set me free from my curse, just like I set free 7 of your sons from their curses. A look of incomprehension crossed his handsome face, replacing the rage for a while. What curse are you talking about? He muttered. Ganga continued in her soft, sweet voice. Not long ago, the 8 Vasus, the cosmic attendant deities of Vishnu, visited Rishi Vasisht's ashram with their wives. One of the wives wanted to keep the Rishi's famous wish-fulfilling cow, Kamadhanu, for herself. She persuaded her husband, Prabhas, the god of sky, to steal it. He and his 7 brothers were caught in the act of stealing the cow, and all were cursed by the angry Rishi to be reincarnated as mortals. The brothers begged for mercy, and the Rishi agreed to alleviate the curse. He said they would be liberated from their human birth as soon as they were born. The Vasus implored me to give birth to them and to drown them in my waters as soon as they were born. I managed to release 7, but this child, she said sadly, looking down at the beautiful, fair-eyed, fair-skinned baby, this child is the cursed Prabhas. Had you not stopped me, he, too, could have been delivered from Rishi Vasisht's curse. Shantanu looked stunned with horror. Probably Prabhas, being the chief culprit, was cursed to endure a longer life on earth, she reasoned, giving a helpless shrug. Why did you not explain all this before to me? Said Shantanu, visibly shaken. You could have saved all of us from this tragedy. Because both of us were cursed by Lord Brahma, said Ganga. In your previous birth, you were King Mahabish, who was privileged to visit Brahma's court. We met there and fell in love. A gush of wind swept my Angavastra away, and while the gods bashfully kept their heads bowed and their eyes downcast, you could not stop looking at me. I blushed in turn and reciprocated the look of desire for you. Our secret lay exposed. Lord Brahma was furious at this public display of desire. He cursed us both to be born on earth and suffer the pain of love and separation, like ordinary mortals. I can return only after breaking your heart. And it's all come true, hasn't it? She raised her eyes, bright with unshed tears. I have broken your heart. Shantanu stood there, his face ashen, the finality of her words crushing him right in front of her eyes. No, he gave a strangled cry. Don't leave me, please. I take all my harsh words back. You know I love you. Oh, I love you so, Ganga. Don't go, please, no. He was crying, holding the baby. I have to go, she said, blinking away her tears, her voice hard. She gently prized the infant from his nerveless arms. No, he whispered hoarsely, grabbing her wrist, his eyes imploring. I have to go from where I came. And I have to take this child with me. Why, oh why are you punishing me? You could have killed me instead. He beseeched her. He looked up and cried out, what curse is this, my lord, that I live a life without the woman I love and a son I can never see again. He fell to his knees, his broad shoulders shuddering with unrestrained sobs. Spare me this sorrow, Ganga, please. Don't curse me to a living death. She turned away from his tortured face, squaring her shoulders. I have to go, but when the time is right, I shall return your son to you. That is all I can promise. It took King Shantanu a moment before Ganga's words sunk in. You mean it? I shall have my son back someday, he said hopefully. Yes, not because I want to be kind to you, she said sorrowfully, but because this poor boy is doomed to live a cursed life on earth. As your son, he is born pious, wise and devoted, but will have to endure endless mortal pain and suffering. I name him Devavrat, the one that possesses the piety of the gods. He is your son, but, as his mother, I shall groom him and teach him the wisdom of the Maharishis and the craft of warfare from the gods. And then I shall return to you the heir to your kingdom, when he is of the right age. Defeated, Shantanu closed his eyes in despair to shut off the sight of his wife leaving him with his newborn son. My son, murmured the distraught father. My Devavrat, I shall wait for you. The fisher girl. The smell of dirt and decay wafted in the damp air, but the girl sitting alone on the shore seemed unperturbed by it. She had sat down on the rock, burying her face in her hands, her slim body shuddering with silent cries. Never in my life have I been so deeply insulted. I, well-educated, refined, the daughter of a fisherman chieftain, suspected of theft by the kingsmen, she thought. They had ransacked and rummaged through the boat she ferried across the river every day. She had been searched like a common street walker. She could not imagine a greater insult, her indignation unmitigated by an oppressive dread. All sorts of absurd ideas came into her mind. If they can suspect me of theft, then they can arrest me, strip me naked and search me, and then lead me through the streets with an escort of soldiers, cast me into a cold, dark cell with mice and woodlice, exactly like the dungeons in which dethroned kings are imprisoned. Her heart quickened with such morbid thoughts, all the stories she had heard about atrocities coming back to her. Who will stand up for me? My poor, old father will probably not have enough money to come and rescue me. If taken to the city, I will be absolutely alone, like a solitary, lost person in a desert, without friends or kin. They can do what they like with me. Callie. She instinctively turned in the direction of the voice. Everyone called her that. Callie, an unimaginative reference to her dark skin, dark hair, and dark eyes. Callie straightened herself, her eyes bleak. Your father is looking for you. You have a guest, shouted her neighbor. She roped the boat to the shore, securing it with an additional loop of a knot after piling the net neatly in it. That was the only functional one they had. They would have to buy a new one once this season got over. But, as always, they were short of money. The steep taxes were eating into the paltry amount they fetched from trips across the river. As she walked towards her home, she decided against telling her father about the ignominious episode. She proceeded slowly to the only stone roof house in the village, an anomaly in the bleak mass of moldy, thatched huts. All of them seemed the same along the ruddy road, decrepit and black with soot and filth, belching black smoke that had yellowed everything into uniform dinginess. There was a sordid, undisciplined feeling about the village which she had got accustomed to, yet loathed. The street was littered with trash and fish scales. Groups of men stood around street corners eyeing her as she walked towards her house. Loafers, her lips curling in contempt, they are a sick, seedy-looking bunch, dirty, tired and angry. Like me. Women hurried past like they had something on their minds. She was seized with a sudden temper. Everything about this place is disgusting. There are no roads any longer, she thought savagely as she waded through the slush. In summer, the track would be dry and dusty, and during the rains, like now, it was an open gutter, exposing them to disease, stink and discomfort. She detested the way the nobles and royalty lived their lives, while she was cursed to a life of hard work and stench, with no hope of ever bridging the gap. Even as she ambled down the muddy street, she was aware of how people kept their distance from her. She was young and educated, yet, the fact was that she was a fisher girl, with the vile stench of fish and salt, sweat and grime, as rotten as moldering fish, forgotten but for the stink they raised. Callie noticed how a passing lady visibly shrank from her, her face twisted in distaste, clamping her nose with her hand as if to keep the odor at bay. Callie was used to being treated as a pariah, the lowest of the low, only allowed a small vestige of dignity once she turned into the lane of the fisher folk. She was after all, their chieftain's daughter. There was a certain regalness about the girl as she strode briskly with her head held high, her eyes openly contemptuous. Feed. Her father had a visitor, she thought resentfully. Another stomach to the visitor was a rishi. A thin, young man with a cadaverous chest and a pronounced limp, immediately lending him an aura of mystery. A lame rishi was an enigma unlike a limping soldier or a crippled prince whose handicap was assumed to be some glorious war injury. This is Rishi Parashar, Satyavati. Hardly anyone knew her as Satyavati, and only her father called her by that name. He is the famous grandson of Rishi Vasisht, a famous rishi himself, Dasharaj was saying. He is currently writing the Vishnu Puran, the first of a series. And he is also an impressive orator, but prefers to call himself a traveling teacher, wandering from one place to another. He was passing through our village. Her father was beaming warmly, which was unusual. He had stopped smiling since they lost a dozen boats in a storm some years ago. He was a swarthy, little man with a wiry face and a narrow, bald head with thin hair making him appear much older. Yet, he exuded a charm and strength. He will rest with us for a while, and then continue with his journey to attend some yagna. Do drop him to the other shore, whenever he wishes, he said. With the morning's incident fresh in her mind, she shuddered at the thought of going near her boat again to work. But she couldn't say anything, lest she had to explain her reluctance to her father. Won't you be having dinner with us? She asked politely instead. The rishi was staring at her with his deep, soulful eyes, the single attractive feature on his thin face. He shook his head. I am fasting, he explained simply. That is one meal saved. She heaved a sigh of relief. Suddenly a thought struck her and she looked at the rishi with doubt. Why had such an illustrious rishi deigned to visit an impoverished fisherman? Don't underestimate your father, Matsyagandha, smiled the rishi, his face transforming magically. She was amazed at how he had read her mind. She laughed derisively, yet it was an attractive, husky sound. Matsyagandha, the girl with the fish smell, but he made it sound like the girl with a fragrance. Your father, as you well know, was once the fisherman chieftain of a formidable tribe that helped in wars. She said dismissively. As you can see, we have fallen on bad times. Not for long, murmured Parashar. I take that as a blessing and not just a wish, she continued tartly, pressing her lips and placing a fingertip on the middle of the lower one, her brows furrowed in a frown. He fixed her with a blank stare. I would like to leave before it gets dark. Would you mind helping me across the river, Matsyagandha? Again that name, and again he had read her reluctance. He continued easily, I have heard you are one of the most trusted and brave people who ferry boats, come storm, thunder or rain. It is man who is the most dangerous, not nature, she said glibly. See how the rich and the powerful treat us, the downtrodden, without the right to live with dignity, to taste all the horrors of poverty and dependence. My father, as you pointed out rightly, was a chieftain, the king's ally, but what is he now but a frail, bankrupt fisherman? It is the war, said Dasharaj. Our guest here was attacked in his ashram. The limp is a reminder, is it not? Parashar gave his small smile. The war has taken its toll on all. But not on the king, she snapped. Our king is a vassal to King Shantanu in Hastinapur, explained Dasharaj. Our king surrendered to Hastinapur without a whimper, Kali retorted. Yet the Kuru army took over our land and everything we own, with a double tax for both the kingdoms. You seem to know your politics well, observed Parashar, for such a young age. It is not politics, it is injustice, she replied swiftly. I am 15, young enough to experience it and old enough to realize it. Parashar smiled warmly, and Kali found herself calming down. They were soon on their way across the river Yamuna, the boat setting off gingerly from the bank. You know your way around, don't you? He murmured. Kali knew he was not talking about the small boat she was maneuvering in the choppy waters of the Yamuna. She was to ferry him across, but they were barely halfway there when the skies darkened ominously. If it rained, her task would be more arduous and she would have to return in a storm. She grimaced. If you are saying I am good with the boat, yes, I do know my way around in these waters. And if you are implying I am worldly wise, yes, I am that, too, she admitted, gritting her teeth, rowing the boat more strongly against the swirling eddies. He was sitting awkwardly, accommodating his left leg. She knew he was observing her. Her strong, sinewy arms, her lissom body moving against the motion of the rocking boat, the sweat and the spray mingling to add sheen to her dusky, shining skin. Her damp Angavastra was clinging to her upper body, straining against the generous swell of her breasts, the heaving movement accentuated by the strain of the exercise. She recognized the gaze. It was a look of lust. She neither resented it nor reveled in it. It was a fact that she was young, lovely and innocent. And she could see it blatantly in his eyes. She decided to ignore the young man. They were in the middle of the river, and she was surprised to find the waters relatively calmer now, as was the weather. She knew she could pause to rest. He seemed to read her thoughts again. I am not in a hurry, he said calmly. Why don't you rest now? She shook her head and continued rowing. She knew what it could lead to if she stopped. From the corner of her eye, she saw him inching closer. "Don't move," she shouted sharply. "You might upturn the boat." He touched her hand, gripping hard at the oars. His touch was fiery. "Give them rest," he repeated gently, his voice sounding like a hoarse whisper against the roaring wind. "If we stop, the boat will toss," she said shortly, careful not to be rude. She knew the man sitting across was a well-known rishi, no ordinary man, who could wield unnatural and mystical powers. A man of wisdom, whose words could result in either a curse or a blessing. A powerful man, she repeated silently to herself, seeing the naked arousal in his eyes. She felt a knot in her stomach. She looked around her. They were alone in a boat, in the middle of a river. He was a strong, young man, who could easily overpower her despite his crippled leg. But unlike him, she could jump into the water and swim back ashore. But she did not want to. He was an intriguing man. Curiosity and desire held her firmly, waiting for him to make a move. His intense eyes pinned on her. He put this hand in the waters. The river suddenly stilled. "Now the boat will not toss. Or turn," he said with an unsteady voice. He moved closer to her, his breath warm on her face, his hand on her thigh. "I want you, Matsyaganda." It was not a confession. He could not have made his intention clearer. She felt no fear, no apprehension, no uncertain anxiety. Instead, she felt a strange sense of power over him. "Much gratitude for making it easy for me to row the boat now," she said casually. "We will reach faster. Let's go to that island," he said gently, yet firmly. "Island? There is no island in the middle of the Yamuna." She laughed, but her smile died as she saw the silhouette of an approaching land mass. He had created an island in the river with his extraordinary powers. He remained silent, his burning eyes not leaving her face. She half hoped that by the time they reached ashore, the young rishi would have come to his senses. The boat hit the sandy bank and glided smoothly to the waterside. She dropped the oars, her hands placed demurely on her lap, waiting for him to alight and leave. But she knew he would not. He wanted to seduce her, yet, it seemed like it was she who was seducing him. Again, she had mixed feelings, the thrill of anticipation and a reluctant hesitation. He wants me, but do I want him? She felt a brief prick of trepidation. She was alone with him, how was she to deal with him? She eyed him skeptically. What would it be like making love to a mighty rishi? Manaka had given birth to Shakuntala. After being with the powerful rishi, Vishwamitra, she thought dazedly, as she watched the young seer get up. What would this rishi give me? She shivered in anticipation. Parashar got up unsteadily, and carefully stepped out of the boat. She expelled a long breath, wondering if he would proceed without looking back. Had his ardor cooled? He turned then, and from the one look he gave her, she knew it had not. With a slow, deliberate motion, he took her hand, and gripped her wrist. She could feel the fire within, searing in his eyes, in his touch. She knew she could not escape him. But was she not repulsed by him, either by his limp or by his desire for her? It was a decisive moment. I am going to make love to a powerful seer, not some young fisher boy or some callow villager. Her heart was racing, the thrill of fear and excitement coursing through her, and her blood was pounding rapidly. Don't be afraid, he said softly, pulling her up against his tall, lean frame. Their thighs touched, but she moved her leg adroitly away, tempting him maddeningly. Do I have a choice? She asked steadily, to refuse or accept you? There was an imperceptible pause, as the question dimmed the smolder in his eyes. Then I beg you, love me, take me, he whispered thickly, pulling her hard against him. She stiffened. She had no chance against his strength. His fingers tightened around her waist, his left hand holding her wrists, crushing her into submission. Then, aroused by the contact of her slim, half-naked body, he gently pushed her down till she lay sprawled on the sandy surface, half-dazed, as he knelt over her. She placed her hand against his thudding chest, but did not push him away. You have magical powers, she said as she furrowed her brows, thoughtfully. I smell of fish. Can you remove it? She asked. People flee from my stink. That is one of the reasons why I have very few admirers, she said. Who wants to make love to a foul-smelling fisher girl? I do, he urged. You shall never regret it. She gazed at him, her heart hammering. Was his power for real? Well, he did still the waters of the river and created an island in it. Then, make me fragrant, she said, more out of curiosity than as a challenge. She knew he was oblivious to her faint stench, and nothing would dissuade him now, yet, she wanted to bide her time. Done, he smiled. He placed his hands on the soles of her feet in the shallow, lapping water, moving his thumbs in a smooth, circular motion. It was strangely erotic. Rubbing them gently, he continued to run a trembling hand slowly from her toes to the slim ankles, up her long, shapely legs, pausing at her waist, then brushing across her breasts, up her long neck to finally cup her face. Suddenly warm now, she smelt a scented glow of sandalwood and roses emanating all around her. You, my Matsyaganda, are going to be my one weakness, he said, his face buried against the hot skin of her exposed neck. That one weakness, I promise, which will make you strong. Can you smell the perfume? He unpinned her braid, his fingers combing through her loose, long hair, pulling her face closer to his fevered mouth. She was enveloped by the intoxicating scent of musk. It's emanating from your body. You will no longer be the stinking fisher girl. Matsyaganda will now be Yojanaganda. Your new, musky fragrance will waft for miles together, and shall entice anyone whom you want. No one will dare call you Kali. She gave a small shake of her head. I am Kali. I don't mind my dark skin, she said petulantly. I don't want to turn fair-skinned. However, what else can you give me, sir? What all mortals crave for? Eternal youth and beauty, he whispered, cleaving her closer, his wiry arms hard around her waist. Your fragrance and your eternal beauty will double your charm. And your power, he murmured. That's what you want, don't you? That hot flush of unbridled power, the way you have control over me right now. I am your slave, and I am a virgin, she said, without a hint of coyness, pushing him back slightly, her black eyes mocking. Her restraint inflamed him and he found himself trembling as he reached for her again. You won't marry me, since you are a wandering mendicant, she persisted. So how do I go back to the world I come from? And what if I have a child from you? She questioned shrewdly, thinking again of Manaka and Shakuntala. Who will marry me? Whomsoever you want. You will remain a virgin, he chuckled, his lips on her bare shoulder. Or rather, the man you will make love to next will not realize that you are not a virgin. Before she could open her mouth to argue, he pressed it lightly with his. You can go back to your world without the child. He will remain with me, brought up as a rishi's child should, he whispered assuredly against her widening smile. The boy will grow up to be a very famous sage, and will bring you great glory. As famous as you, she laughed softly, parting her lips for him to allow him to taste the sweetness of her mouth. No, more famous than me, possibly more than my grandfather, too, he promised. The world will remember him thousands of years later. Rishi Vishwamitra had given me such a blessing. And you will be known as the mother of this extraordinary child. She pulled back her face to look warily at him. How can I ever acknowledge this child if it is born out of wedlock, O wise Rishi? She said, frowning, biting her lower lip. I will be an unmarried mother. I neither want to renounce my child nor make him suffer the insult of being illegitimate, she said fiercely. Parashar bent his head to caress her smooth cheek with his lips to ease the tension from her face. He will be our child, Matsyaganda. He will be so exceptional that no one will dare call him illegitimate, he said cryptically. You are an extraordinary girl yourself. You can never be bound by conventions or be tied down by others. You were born to rule, princess. She stiffened pleasurably against him, aroused not by desire but by ambition. Born to rule, she murmured to herself. That is why I am with you now, he muttered, pulling gently at her lips. She could feel his heat seeping through her, her strength giving away in his crushing arms. She was being overpowered, trapped under the weight of his body. I see, she said huskily. He was out of his mind with desire. His seeking lips trailed down her neck. Even though his words made no sense to her, she registered their prophecy. This was her opportunity. He could turn her unprivileged life into an unusual one. He had undone her flimsy bodice, his hands on her full, bare breasts. She glanced up at him with a half-smile, her eyes igniting him to heated urgency. If she had to give, she would take as well. We could be spotted from here, she breathed, her eyes luminous. Matsyaganda, he groaned. As his lips crushed down on hers, she became aware that they had been ensconced in a thick blanket of fog. Anything else? He sighed against the soft swell of her bared breast. She shook her head as she surrendered, finally and triumphantly, to him. She was dimly aware that he had pulled up her loose antaria. She became aware of a sharp stone grinding into her spine, but it was nothing compared to the pain she experienced when he thrust himself into her body violently, with fevered passion. She gasped. It was momentary, but unbeknown, she would feel the ache all through her life. She had lost her innocence to gain freedom. If you like the video, please do like, share and subscribe to my YouTube channel.